Hello there, and thank you for joining us. Coming up next in our World News program. Moscow parades its army and Russian President Vladimir Putin mark Victory Day, celebrating the Soviet Union's World War II triumph over Nazi Germany. 60 people were killed in the bombing of a school in the Lugansk region of eastern Ukraine, according to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Two Palestinians, one of them a teenager, were killed in a separate incident in the occupied West Bank. And later on in our news, former head of security John Lee won the sixth-term chief executive election in Hong Kong, and the European Union's foreign policy chief Joseph Borrell says his election violates democratic principles and political pluralism. Hello again, those were today's top stories, and first we kick it off from Moscow. Moscow parades its army and Russian President Vladimir Putin marks Victory Day, celebrating the Soviet Union's World War II triumph over Nazi Germany. The Russian leader linked his war in Ukraine with that historic struggle in a speech that blamed the West for the conflict. Zahra Farjani in the following.
On Moscow's Red Square, Russian President Vladimir Putin led the annual Victory Day parade on May 9th, which marks the anniversary of the Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany in World War II. The Russian president relates his war in Ukraine with that historic struggle. In a speech, Putin proclaims that his army is fighting in Ukraine to defend the homeland against the external threat that, according to him, intends to weaken and split Russia.
These days, you are fighting for our people in Donbass, for the security of our homeland, Russia. You are fighting for the homeland, for its future, so that no one forgets the lessons of World War II, so that there is no place in the world for executioners, punishers, and Nazis.
Putin promised that Russia would look after the dead soldiers' children and families.
Every death of our soldiers and officers is a grief to us all, and irreplaceable loss to their families and friends. The state, the regions, businesses and public organizations will do all they can to look after their families and help them.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, commemorating the victory over Nazi Germany in World War II, said his country would win in its war with Russia and would not abandon any territory.
We are fighting for the freedom of our children, and therefore we will win. We will never forget what our ancestors did in World War II, where more than 8 million Ukrainians died. The war took at least 50 million lives.
Russia has started what it calls special military operation in Ukraine on February 24th. Russian president justifies Russia's invasion, that NATO was creating threats right next to its borders.
And when asked about this development of Russian President, Mr. Dennis Small, American editor-in-chief of the EIR magazine's Ibero, had this to say.
Soviet Union in World War II. They lost 27 million people in the fight against fascism, along with the allies in the United States and the UK and others, played a central role in defeating fascism at that time. And I think that they view what is happening in Ukraine today through the prism of that historical experience. And I think they are right to do that. There is much discussion in the media about how this is an unprovoked attack by Putin on Ukraine, and that is simply not true. If you look back 30 years, which the Russians have mentioned repeatedly, when the Soviet Union fell apart, Russia was given repeated assurances by the West, including by the Secretary of State of the United States, James Baker III, that NATO would not move 1 inch to the east, and it guaranteed that there would be no placement of heavy weapons there. NATO did not move 1 inch to the east. It moved 1,000 kilometers to the east. 16 countries later, right at the border of Russia, and repeatedly over this entire 30-year period, especially in the last 2 years, Russia stated that they would feel a systemic danger to their nation if this continued. Russia's warnings were ignored, and the results are what we are seeing in Ukraine. The alternative is clearly at hand, which is a neutral Ukraine, a guarantee of no NATO expansion, and a negotiated peace along the lines of what we in Western Europe and the United States recall as the Treaty of Westphalia from the 17th century, when the security interests of all sides were protected, not just one side.
And in an important speech from the National Army Museum, British Defense Secretary Ben Wallace sent a strong message to Russian President Vladimir Putin on Monday on the occasion of the Russian Victory Day. Ben Wallace said that the master of the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin, reflects the fascism of Nazi Germany during World War II. He added that there can be no Victory Day for Moscow, but a day of defeat in Ukraine, and a shame for the Russian president.
Through the invasion of Ukraine, Putin, his inner circle and his generals are now mirroring fascism and tyranny of 77 years ago, repeating the errors of the last century's totalitarian regimes. They are showing the same disregard for human lives, national sovereignty and the rules-based international system. The very system, not least the United Nations Charter itself, that we conceived together and for which we fought and were victorious together, in the hope of saving future generations from the scourge of war.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky gathered or attended a G7 meeting from the Ukrainian capital Kyiv. The group of 7 pledged to gradually reduce its dependence on Russian oil. Meanwhile, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, during a surprising visit to Ukraine, announced the sending of new weapons of Kyiv and imposed new sanctions against Moscow. In video interview with G7 leaders, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that Russian missile strikes and deportations are imitations of Nazi actions during World War II.
The missile strikes on Odessa and our other cities are an imitation of how the Nazis tried to bombard and destroy European cities. The deportation of more than 500,000 Ukrainians to Russia and the camps of filtration, as they call them, set up by Russian troops in the occupied territories of Ukraine, are imitations of the deportations and concentration camps organized by the Nazis in Europe.
And during a press conference with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv, the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he witnessed the brutality of what he called Russia's illegal war when he visited Irpin, a Kyiv suburb.
We began our day today with a visit to Irpin, where I witnessed firsthand the brutality of Russia's illegal war, of neighborhoods battered, homes destroyed. Today, we send a resounding message to the world that Canada and our allies continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine.
And during a video conference intervention at a G7 summit on Sunday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that 60 people were killed in the bombing of a school in the Lugansk region of eastern Ukraine.
60 people died in Russian bombing of a school in eastern Ukraine, confirmed President Volodymyr Zelensky Sunday evening at a G7 summit dedicated to show unity and support for the country in conflict with Russia.
Just yesterday, a Russian bomb killed 60 people. Civilians, they were taking cover from shelling in the buildings of an ordinary school, which was attacked by the Russian airstrike. To do so is to precisely imitate the harm of the Nazis did to Europe.
The governor of the Lugansk region, Sergei Gaidai, provided the same assessment on the Russian-language television Current Time TV Sunday morning, explaining that there were a total of 90 people on the spot at the time of the strike. Only 27 were saved.
Given that it was an airstrike and not a simple artillery shell, the temperature at the time
of the explosion was enormous. Certainly our rescuers will clear the debris as quickly as possible, but there is a very tight chance that there will be any survivors, but we hope.
This comes as Russia celebrates the victory over Nazi Germany in 1945, which Russian President Vladimir Putin often compares to the deadly conflict in Ukraine.
The president of the German Bundestag, Bärbel Bas, is visiting Bucha, the city allegedly witnessing war crimes involving Russian soldiers. She attended an exhibition of photographs on these crimes. The head of state noted the importance of her visit to Ukraine at this difficult time and on a special day, the Day of Remembrance and Reconciliation. Since the beginning of the Russian military operation in Ukraine, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has been defending his policies on television, ensuring that he would not do everything asked of him, while being chastised for his claimed delays and lack of leadership.
Ich habe Ihnen geschildert, was wir tun, Recht und Freiheit zu verteidigen in der Ukraine.
I have outlined what we are doing in Ukraine and throughout Europe to preserve justice and freedom. It's a substantial amount. At the same time, we will not just do everything the other requires. I pledged in my oath of office to protect the German people. This involves ensuring the safety of our country and friends.
Und unsere Verbündeten vor Gefahren zu schützen.
First Lady Jill Biden spent part of Mother's Day making an unannounced trip to Ozhhorod, Ukraine, a small city in the far southwest corner of Ukraine. A country for the last 10 weeks has been in military confrontation with Russia. At a converted school that now serves as temporary housing for displaced citizens, Biden met with Ukrainian First Lady Olena Zelenska, who has not been in public since the start of the war on February 24th.
I'm so grateful to the people of Slovakia for opening up their arms and their homes, but most of all, opening up their hearts. So the United States stands with you. Thank you.
Over 170 civilians have arrived to Zaporizhia after they were evacuated from Maripo Azovstal steel plant. Evacuees expressed their relief after being stuck for over 2 months with no means of life, which made their evacuation an obligation and made the interference of the UN Security Council compulsory.
More than 170 Mariupol civilians, including 40 evacuees from the Azovstal steel plant in a port southeastern Ukraine, almost entirely under Russian control, arrived in Zaporizhia on Sunday evening.
It's hard, morally hard, medically hard, because I was out of medicine. For 2 days we thought about running away, my husband and I, but we had to stay for 2 months.
The evacuees, some with young children, got off the white buses, which carried them to the parking lot of the shopping center in this major city in southeastern Ukraine, which had become a reception center for people fleeing areas occupied by Russian army.
Here are children's paintings that I took away as a souvenir. This pizza Artyom Egorov drew. It was a motivation for me to get up in the morning, prepare breakfast, dinner, entertain children, to make them forget the war.
Aid workers were escorting elderly people, including an old lady in a wheelchair. A total of 174 civilians arrived on board of 8 buses from Mariupol.
Yes, the factory is in ruins. It was difficult to climb the metal debris. They made us go through paths. If there was a workshop before, now it's like a ruin.
On Friday, Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister Irina Vereshchuk spoke of the Azovstal women, children and elderly people released from Azovstal. On Saturday, Kyiv announced that all civilians, women and old children and the elderly had been evacuated from the huge Azovstal metallurgical complex, the last pocket of resistance of Ukrainian forces against the Russian army in the devastated city of Mariupol.
2 Palestinians, 1 teenager were killed in separate incidents in the occupied West Bank on Sunday. The Palestinian man died after he was shot by Zionist troops trying to cross separation barrier near a military checkpoint in a separate incident. Zionist forces stated that the teenager was suspected of carrying a knife to stab their troops. Hundreds of gunmen on motorbikes launched synchronized attacks on the three communities. According to a local authority and locals, Aminu Sulaiman, the administrative head of Bakura district, which includes the villages, said the gunmen who attacked the three villages in northwest Nigeria's Zamfara state, which killed at least 48 people and left many injuries. The former head of security, John Lee, won the sixth-term chief executive election in Hong Kong. Following that, the European Union's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, said that Lee's elections violates democratic principles and political pluralism in Hong Kong. But China said John Lee's election is entirely a matter of China's internal affairs. Nabil Khazini has more insights.
An election without suspense, and especially without any surprise. There was little doubt over John Lee to be elected as Hong Kong's next chief executive. He is Hong Kong's first leader from a police background. A security chief in Hong Kong at the time of massive pro-democracy protests 3 years ago. Lee oversaw the crackdown on demonstrations and the severe political takeover that followed.
Having restored order from chaos, it is high time that Hong Kong starts a new chapter of development.
John Lee was the only candidate and won with over 99% of the vote, in which nearly all 1,500 committee members, who, according to analysts, are overwhelmingly pro-Beijing. But the European Union has slammed the selection process and called it a violation of democratic principles and political pluralism.
Election of chief executive violates democratic principles and political pluralism in Hong Kong. Selection process is yet another step in the dismantling of the one country, two systems principle. Chinese and Hong Kong authorities should abide by their national and intel commitment.
John Lee didn't take too long to answer, saying EU's comments were wrong.
Comments made by the EU, I disagree, and I think they were wronged.
Meanwhile, China hailed the result, saying it showed Hong Kong society having a high level of recognition and approval for Lee. Beijing said the election of Lee is entirely a matter of China's internal affairs.
How and who will be elected in Hong Kong's election is entirely a matter of China's internal affairs, and no external forces can make irresponsible remarks.
So far, Hong Kong's new leader hasn't given many concrete details about his political project, but he assured that he will reveal more after taking office on July.
Sri Lanka's Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa has resigned amid mass protests at the government's handling of the economic crisis, according to officials. The move came as the island was placed under curfew after violent clashes between Rajapaksa supporters and anti-government protesters in Colombo. The government granted the military sweeping powers of arrest and detention on Friday after unions brought the country to a virtual standstill to pressure President Gotabaya Rajapaksa from power.
And people are struggling, and the poverty line, the poor has become poorer, and the middle class has become poor. And the people are expecting this government to do only one thing: get out, get to the countries that we all have invested and give us our money back. That's
Manny Pacquiao, a retired Filipino boxer and presidential contender, cast his ballot in Sarangani province. Pacquiao, a senator, is a long shot to win the presidential race, trailing favorites Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and Lenny Robredo in the polls. Sofian Kinturi has more.
Retired Filipino boxer and presidential candidate Manny Pacquiao votes at the polling station in Sarangani province. Pacquiao, who is a senator, is unlikely to win the presidential election, trailing in the polls far behind favorites Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and Lenny Robredo.
Voting is very important. We will choose the leaders who will serve our nation. Because many of us support her, I
During the Philippine presidential elections, people queue to vote at school that has been turned into voting station. On Monday, almost 67 million Filipinos voters are likely to elect new president. According to the Commission on Elections, the country has around 65.7 million registered, and there are another 1.69 million people in the world. Filipinos may vote for a new set of leaders, including president, vice president, senators, lower house members, provincial and municipal authorities.
Moving on to Cuba now, where the death toll from an explosion of a hotel in the Cuban capital, Havana, on Friday continues to rise. The Cuban Ministry of Public Health said on Sunday evening that the death toll has risen to 31 dead, while 24 remain in hospital. Meanwhile, firefighters and rescuers had been working since early Sunday morning in search for any possible survivors under the rubble of the building in Old Havana. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López began official talks in Havana on Sunday with his Cuban counterpart Miguel Díaz-Canel, where he reiterated his support for Cuba and called for the lifting of the American blockade. Accompanied by Vice President Salvador Valdez, Andrés Manuel López went to the nearby Palace of the Revolution, where Mr. Díaz-Canel received him with military honors in a prestigious ceremony.
Insistiré con el presidente Biden.
I will urge President Biden that no country in the Americas be excluded from the summit to be held next month in Los Angeles, California, and that the authorities of each country decide freely whether or not to participate in the meeting.
De cada país decidan libremente, como primer paso, que Estados Unidos le va.
As first step, the United States should lift blockade on the sister nation in order to restore relations of cooperation and friendship between the peoples of the two nations.
De las dos naciones. Prefiero seguir manteniendo la esperanza.
In this sense, we agree on the inappropriateness and unjustified character of excluding countries of our region from hemispheric events. It seems that this will happen in the so-called Summit of Americas.
En la revolución.
The economist and former finance minister Rodrigo Chavez has been sworn in for a 4-year term as president of Costa Rica. Chavez wants to reinvigorate the country's ailing economy, but also faces controversy over earlier sexual harassment allegations. Costa Rica's new president, Rodrigo Chavez, was sworn in on Sunday, promising to fight corruption and revive the economy. Hours after numbers of women took to the streets in rejection of him being president for the previous allegations of sexual harassment.
I am honored to receive this presidential sash at a time when extremely important challenges are ahead, not only for the future of our country, but for the very destiny of humanity. There are no distinctions here, no differences between the ruling party and the opposition. If the political class fails once again, our country could collapse.
And finally, sports. Manchester City takes a major step closer to the Premier League championship by taking advantage of Liverpool's squandered points. Pep Guardiola's team grabbed control of the Etihad Stadium before half-time with goals from Raheem Sterling and Aymeric Laporte, while Arsenal overcame relegation-threatened Leeds 2-1 on Sunday to improve their chances of finishing in the top 4.
Yeah, very pleased. Perfect afternoon. Just before the start of the game, I felt in our crowd that they were disappointed but not grumpy and upset and sad about who we are as a team. And what we have done today, we have done the last 5 years in every 3 days. So, and 3 more points and 3 left. 1 competition to play, and
let's have a reminder of our top stories now. Moscow parades its army and Russian President Vladimir Putin marked Victory Day, celebrating the Soviet Union's World War II triumph over Nazi Germany. 60 people were killed in the bombing of a school in the Lugansk region of eastern Ukraine, according to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Two Palestinians, one a teenager, were killed in separate incidents in the occupied West Bank. And finally, you watched Now News. Former head of security John Lee won the 6th-time chief executive election in Hong Kong. The European Union's foreign policy chief Joseph Borrell says his election violates democratic principles and political pluralism. Well, that's the end of our program. Thank you for tuning in, and bye for now.